Hello, my name's Karen, and I'm going to tell you today about the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. Most of us are familiar with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, but haven't heard of CPTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that PTSD is the result of one traumatic incident that affects us, and CPTSD is the result of many traumatic incidences, usually starting in childhood, and usually in a situation where we are not able to leave, and so there's a feeling of being trapped in an unsafe environment. So how does it develop? Let me tell you my story, because I have CPTSD. I was raised in a loving home, but my mother had terrible bouts of depression. And nobody explained to me as a child what these times were. And so, to all intents and purposes, it just seemed like my mother, in those times, abandoned me, was not interested in me, and therefore it seemed didn't love me. She was my security, and so it deeply affected me. Also, my family was deeply religious and belonged to a legalistic, fundamentalist church. It was a hellfire and brimstone church, so I grew up with a fear of God, a fear of not being good enough, a fear of disappointing him, and therefore fearing eternal damnation. Both of these elements in my youth caused me to become an anxious person and to have a deep sense of insecurity. So, what are the symptoms of complex PTSD? Well, there is anxiety, there is usually an attachment issue, difficulty in relationships and trusting, difficulty in trusting our own judgment, as well as trusting others. There are also emotional flashbacks that can be triggered by even the most innocuous thing and take us back right into that sense of trauma that happened initially. Now, why is it that as an adult, we are still impacted by things that happened to us as children? I think the easiest way to explain this is to use the example of a car. When a car is on the assembly line, the way it is put together will affect the way it runs for the rest of its life. So, if the engine is not put together in such a way that all the parts work properly together, then it's not going to run smoothly through life. And when we're young, our brains are still developing. And if that is interrupted by trauma, then our brains do not become the effective tools that we need to live a life that runs smoothly. There's also conditioning. Conditioning being the input that we get from our significant or caretakers in our lives. If the input is unhealthy, abusive, neglectful in some way, that's like the fuel being put into a car being poorly made, not being right for the car, and therefore the car isn't going to run smoothly at all. Like dirty petrol, it's going to affect the running of the car. So, does that mean then as an adult I'm stuck with these issues? No. Just like a car that is put together badly at the beginning, for instance, a bad mechanic or a bad factory line worker, and also if the fuel that has been put into that car has somehow damaged the engine because it's unhealthy, a good mechanic in that car's later life can go back to the source of the issue, find out the problem and put it right. And also can clean up the mess made by the bad petrol being put in. In the same way, we, as human beings, can seek help from a trauma specialist, a therapist, who, like a good mechanic, will talk to us about our past and our upbringing, talk to us about the issues that have caused us to be damaged and therefore have life that doesn't run smoothly. It doesn't mean we are destined to be troubled all our lives, because they can teach us coping mechanisms and ways of meditating and mindfulness that will enable us to be able to manage our symptoms and not just survive the trauma we've been through, but to thrive. Now, if any of you, having listened to this, can recognize symptoms in your own lives and think you might have CPTSD, don't carry on stuttering along like a badly built car. Seek out help, because talking therapy will enable you to find a way of thriving and not just surviving. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you well.